Anyway, okay, so this isn't good stuff. This will accelerate your life, unfortunately, and that's not a good thing. While the brain gains feelings of euphoria and well-being from cocaine, the heart is being abused by the substance, and this is the biggest problem. So despite the fact that you feel good and you feel good for right now, what you're doing is you're destroying yourself for the future, and that's what's happened to my niece. She destroyed herself by using that stuff, and of course she was using it because her significant other was using it, and you know that was a cool thing to do. You know, everybody
Are they
liked
still together?
I'm sorry?
Are they still together?
He died. He overdosed. Killed himself.
Oh my gosh.
Which was, and now she's married for the third time. I have no right to complain about somebody being married 3 times. The first guy she just dumped. She just dumped him. The second guy, and she dumped him for the second guy. And the second guy was so cool because he was a guitar repairman, you know, so he could play the guitar, and he was so cool, and he shaved his whole body, you know, that kind of cool stuff. But there's a reason why he shaved his body, and I'll explain it in just a minute. But now she's married to the third guy, and all of a sudden she's having all of these autoimmune problems. She's got autoimmune problems in her liver, and yeah. And that was caused by, this stuff. Probably not cocaine, probably crystal meth. It was, you know, it was up in northern Indiana, so the probability that she was able to get cocaine wasn't very high. You can find it in Chicago, but you really can't find it anyplace else.
Is it like this but in rock form?
You mean?
Crystal meth? No, never mind. Sorry.
Yeah. Crystal meth does come in rocks, and you do cook it like that. Cocaine causes heart rates to increase and the blood vessels to constrict, raising blood pressure 20 to 30 units. Small muscle repair stops during use. This is attractive, isn't it? So this is why you feel better. You feel really good because you got all this, your blood pressure goes up, and it makes you feel like you're on top of the world and you're ready to fly. The problem is it stops everything else. So if it normally if my blood pressure raises, you know, I'm a fairly healthy individual, my body repairs whatever breaks down. That's what happens. That's when I'll probably go to the gym, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. But when I'm lifting, I'll be destroying tissue. That's what happens when you lift. But I will be repairing it almost immediately. Hopefully, if I can stay hydrated enough. I'll be repairing it almost immediately. So I will be actually building muscle. I'll be building mass. But if you're on this stuff, even you could lift all day long, and of course you're destroying your muscle tissue and you're not repairing it. So what would happen if I snorted cocaine and went over and lifted? I could lift for 2 or 3 hours. I could lift a lot more weight than I normally do, but I would be breaking down so much muscle tissue, and I would be damaging my heart. The next day I'd be sore as hell. I wouldn't be able to move. Whereas normally I don't have that problem. If I stay hydrated, that's the problem. Stay hydrated. Small muscle repair stops, of course. The stress on the heart and the muscle damage being done by its use can cause damage to the heart muscle, coronary arteries, and other blood vessels of the heart, and this is not good. So these individuals, a lot of times, they do so much damage to their heart that they die young. They die in their 30s or 40s, and they'll die of a heart attack because they've done so much destructive. There's something else that happens. Oh, here it is right here. It's the calcium. Okay. Yeah. Prolonged high blood pressure weakens blood vessel walls in the brain, leading to stroke, which is always fun. Cocaine also causes a curious condition where calcium and fat deposits collect in blood vessels, causing heart attacks or stroke. Right now, we've got a president whose calcium since 2008 has like quadrupled. The calcium deposits in his heart. And this is really concerning to people because this is, I mean, the calcium is like he's creating little bones in his blood vessels that will eventually block his blood vessels. If it's just fat deposits, you can go in there with a balloon and you can smash it up against the wall of the artery of the blood vessel. But if it's calcium, it's a rock, and there's nothing you can do. You have to go in there and take it out, ream it out. You have to go in there with a drill and ream it out and suck all that calcium. Well, it's, you know, yeah, it's all you can do.
So our president is snorting cocaine?
I didn't say that. He had, and there's some people, this just happens to.
Oh,
and
okay.
we'll pretend that that's what's going on with him. He doesn't drink, but he does have these calcium deposits. And it's not something that you see in a lot of different people. So there's a lot of questions as to what's going on with Donald Trump. And of course, this is a big concern to a lot of people. The calcium in this guy's heart. He's a little bit older than I am. I think he's 72 or 73. So you know, this is the time when this kind of stuff would happen, that he would have a heart attack. And of course, he's under a lot of pressure. He is, so. But cocaine does this to you, and I'm not saying he used cocaine. It may be a genetic thing as far as he's concerned. His father died of a heart attack in his 80s, so you know, it's potentially that's what his problem is. It's a congenital, a genetic thing, rather than cocaine. Cocaine crosses the placental barrier, meaning that when mom uses, her fetus uses also, and within seconds. The damage is done to the fetus's blood vessels in a similar reaction to that of the mother, and may result in the mother miscarrying, the baby having a stroke. Placental separation, where the placenta separates from the uterine wall, and of course they miscarried. This is really dangerous because the baby stops growing as soon as this placental separation takes place. The baby stops growing. So if it's not viable at that age, at that stage, then it will be born. It won't be able to survive when it's born, or they will develop SIDS after they're born. Now, a lot of really stupid problems with women that snort cocaine. But there's something that we're going to find out about mothers and babies, mothers who use cocaine and crystal meth. One study looking at 717 babies born to cocaine-using mothers found that they were born on an average 1.2 weeks early, 1.2 pounds lighter, 1 inch shorter. The head circumference was 3/4 of an inch smaller. The babies are born agitated, irritable, with high blood pressure. You do not want to be in the nursery with one of these kids. They cry like a cat. It just is so irritating. It's because they're in pain. So they're trying to tell you that they're in pain and they want it taken care of. And it's just constant. They never sleep.
Do they give them like a substance to help?
No, how can you? How much would you give them? Yeah, this is a problem. This is a really serious problem. I was working at Children's Hospital in Omaha back in '83 and '84, and that's right at the beginning of when people were using cocaine. It had just become popular, like in the late '70s into the middle '80s. It was really, really, really popular, especially with wealthy people. They used a lot of cocaine. So most of these babies were the babies of relatively well-to-do people. The richest person in Omaha, his wife gave birth to a cocaine-addicted baby. It didn't survive, but I mean, and we worked on that kid for weeks, and it didn't survive. But it was pretty ugly. Anyway, and this was all. The problem is you have to isolate these kids because they bother all the rest of the kids, and nobody can, the babies, and nobody can sleep. So it was a really serious situation. The baby is usually malnourished because that is the lifestyle of the cocaine and amphetamine user. She doesn't eat very well because she doesn't feel like she needs to. I mean, this is the stuff that people take as a diet pill. So they don't feel like they need to eat. They stay up for a prolonged period of time. They have one thing on their mind, and that's finding more stuff, finding more amphetamines or cocaine.
Don't they have a law now on mothers who take drugs? And then when the baby's born, they're charged with
Child abuse,
child abuse, child neglect.
child endangerment.
Yeah.
It all depends on the state. Escaping from the cocaine-soaked placental environment does not remove the child from danger. Stimulant users are often inattentive and uncaring about the needs of others, and this includes their infants, which results in emotional deprivation for the child, neglect of the child, and bonding problems. As we learned, we learned 3 years ago when Kevin Cody was here. He was a policeman in Pinyon. He said women were selling their children for sex so that they could get more stuff. They cared so little about their kids, they were more worried about them finding something to use than their children. I mean, they literally gave them away, used them as a commodity. That's ugly. That's really, really ugly. These people don't care about anything except themselves. And it's the drug that does that to them. Studies show that the rates of mental delays are double among stimulant-exposed children, especially if they stay with the kids. The problem is the woman will sometimes use the children as a bargaining chip. So she wants to keep the children, but she wants to keep the children so that she can use them to bargain for more stuff. The grandparents will try to get custody of the child, and she'll fight them tooth and nail. But she's not fighting them tooth and nail because she loves the children. She's fighting them because this is something that she can use in the future to get more stuff. It's ugly. All is not bleak, of course. If we can get the kid away from the parent that won't take care of them, then if with concentrated postnatal care, the infants usually catch up by toddlerhood. Why toddlerhood? Remember, meth head lasts for about 18 months, and it will last about 18 months with this kid. So they're behind, and then 18 months after they're born, they start to recover. Their brains start to recover. So they have the same withdrawals symptoms as the mother would.
But they become okay later in life?
Yeah, they're fine. It just takes 18 months.
Crazy, though.
The human brain is extremely flexible. You can lose half of your brain and still be as smart as you would have been otherwise. These kids, of course, have lost a portion of their brain. I mean, the nerves have been destroyed by the drugs, but of course, the brain is flexible. So these individuals will not have any problems in the future, despite the fact that their mother was a crackhead and that they were raised in that type of an environment. Now, the other problem is that no matter where this child is, if this child's being raised by the mother, then she's probably smoking dope in the house. Well, this stuff is really toxic. It's extremely toxic. And you talk about first-hand smoke, you talk about second-hand smoke, which is in the air. But third-hand smoke, especially in this case, it gets all over the furniture, it contaminates the walls. So anything the baby touches, it potentially is getting this toxic substance back into their system. So they literally have to remove the child from that environment in order for the child to recover. Now, the other problem is the house. The house becomes contaminated with crack, with this toxic substance. So what has to happen? There's nothing you can do. I mean, I guess you could pull down all the walls and put up new sheetrock or something, pull up all the rugs, but you would have to recover all the surfaces or replace all of the surfaces. My great niece was cooking meth in the house that my brother bought for her and her mom. And they had to condemn it. They condemned it, and they had to tear it down. And he had to pay for it. As stupid as that was. Cost him $8,000 to knock that damn house down. And my parents paid for it. Tolerance of the euphoric effect begins with the first usage of cocaine. Increased usage has been seen at 25 times the level within days. If you see somebody, you watch a movie and these people are snorting lines of cocaine, the first time they snort cocaine, they're only snorting just a little tiny bit. But as time goes by, they need more and more and more to get the same buzz, so the line gets longer and longer and longer. This is due to the adaptation of the brain to dopamine stimulation in the nucleus accumbens. Tolerance is to the euphoric effect only, since paranoia increases, as does cardiovascular effects. So the euphoric effect is becomes less and less and less, but the paranoia just continues to increase. So this person suddenly doesn't trust anybody. This is one of the things we see with almost all the drugs. Marijuana, the people are especially paranoid, but cocaine, meth, crystal meth, all of these things cause these individuals to be quite paranoid. And of course, that if they are violent and paranoid, now we got a really serious problem, because they assume if somebody walks past their house that this person's watching them, that kind of thing, and they may go out and kill them. We've seen this before. We had this problem in Montana. Crystal meth was a really serious problem. It's cheap. It's easy to make, relatively easy to make. You can make it in a Coke bottle. The Nazi method, the shake and bake method. So I mean, there were a lot of people that were using this stuff, and they had a lot of problems with violence. They had a lot of individuals that were just wandering around and killing people for no reason whatsoever. Even though they may not have known this person, they assumed that they were watching them, just because they walked past. So we saw a lot of that in Montana. You can't maintain this for a very long period of time. I mean, you can't use crystal meth for 5 or 6 years without something horrible happening. Normally it has to do with violence, and it has to do with the paranoia of the individual. So you just can't maintain that type of lifestyle for an extended length of time. Withdrawal from cocaine use is very real, despite the misperceptions of researchers into the 1990s. If you read a textbook from the 1990s, they'll tell you that there are no withdrawals from cocaine, but it's not true. All the crash symptoms become accentuated and prolonged depending on the dosage used, frequency of use, and the length of use. The individual suffers from anhedonia. They can't find anything that makes them feel good. They lack energy, of course. It's all the opposite of what happens to you when you're stoned. You're euphoric. You've got all the energy in the world. You want to work for days and days and days. You're not depressed. You feel good because it raises your norepinephrine level. But of course, when you're going through withdrawals, you're emotionally depressed. You have no motivation whatsoever. Anxiety is increased. Vivid and unpleasant dreams. And this is what causes people to go back to using, because they can't stand the dreams. These are intrusive dreams. These are dreams that have nothing to do with reality. But these it's not like PTSD, where you dream about this, being in combat or being raped or whatever the situation is. These are vivid and this is like having monsters attacking you. I mean, it's really kind of interesting. And this is usually what drives the individual to start using again. Insomnia, because before, it disrupts your sleep cycle. Increased appetite, whereas before you weren't eating at all. Now, of course, you're eating you're eating a lot. Psychomotor agitation and intense craving for the drug. But it's a really interesting cycle. Cycle of quitting and relapse of stimulants. After a binge session with the drug, the individual crashes, sleeps for a prolonged period, awakens with renewed energy, and swears off the drug forever. This is very, very common. So you will meet people that I haven't used for 3 or 4 days, or a week, or 2 weeks. The individual feels better for a few days and begins to feel as if as they did before they began using the drug. 7 to 10 days after quitting, the craving starts to build, energy levels drop, emotional depression sets in, as they can find no pleasure in their surroundings. They're going through withdrawals is what's happening. So they have anhedonia. After a couple of weeks or a month, they relapse, not being able to deal with the depression or the ever-increasing craving. And this is one of the reasons why people can't stay off of cocaine once they start using. They almost have to go someplace and detox. They can't do it on their own because they have all these problems. And what they try to do when they send them to rehab is they try to keep them busy. If they can keep them busy, then potentially all this stuff will go away. The biggest problem, as you can imagine, is at night, when they're supposed to be controlling themselves. During the day, everything's fine because there are people around and they can take their mind off of what's going on. It's at night that they have problems. While cocaine overdoses are common, because of the rapid metabolization, the effects are rarely fatal. People almost never die of cocaine overdose. In large city emergency rooms in 2004, 41% of the visits were due to cocaine usage, most because of the individual felt as if they were dying, which is really irritating. These people will come in and you say, did you do anything or were you using anything? And of course they never were. Of course they never were. And they no, I just have a heart attack. I feel like I'm having a heart attack. So you do an EKG on them, and it turns out that it turns out erratic. And the doctor comes and looks at it, and about that time they figure out that the individual is using cocaine because of the erratic pattern of the heart. And there's no T waves. T wave is the normal beat of the heart is fairly rhythmic, and it spikes. But if you have a T wave, you'll have a spike, and it'll stay up, and it looks like a tombstone. So it's normally just a bunch of.
But if they're on cocaine,
it'll be erratic. It'll be erratic. So it's like having heart palpitations. Where your heart just kind of jiggles a little bit. They'll have a bunch of those. Remember, the heart rate increases, and you have all that constriction of the blood vessels. So yeah, it does feel like dying, and potentially they will die if they're not careful, if they don't stop. The United States averages between 2,000 to 3,000 stimulant deaths every year. Normally it's not cocaine, normally it's crystal meth. They overdose on crystal meth, or they have a seizure.
Is that when they take both?
They wouldn't take both. Cocaine is a better high, but it only lasts for 5 to 10 minutes. Crystal meth is a more prolonged high, but it's not nearly as intense as cocaine. So it all depends on what they're looking for.
Have you ever seen someone snort cocaine?
Snort cocaine?
Yeah.
Have I ever seen them snort
and
cocaine?
then how they react in the stages?
Only on television. I've only seen it on television. And I've only gotten them in the emergency rooms afterwards, which was irritating enough.
Do they usually have a bleeding nose, like you were saying?
I'll explain that to you in a minute. It's a vasoconstrictor.
Okay.
It's a vasoconstrictor, so the blood vessels in your nose are constricting at the same time. Well, the cartilage in your nose is alive.
Yeah.
This is living tissue. So if you constrict those blood vessels too much, then they don't get fed. Especially if you snort cocaine, and then you allow yourself to come down, and then you snort it again. So you snort up a bunch of it in a select day. Well, what you're doing is you're starving your cartilage for blood, and your cartilage will die.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of times, or you'll hemorrhage your blood vessels because you're constricting them, then you're allowing them to release. And when they release, the blood goes surging back in there. And a lot of times what will happen, these individuals will get a bloody nose, and you can't stop it because the damage was done when it was constricted. So now you've got that cut, that hemorrhage, that break in their blood vessel, that when it's open, it just pours out. It just pours out. And what you normally have to do is cauterize it. In other words, you have to go in there with something hot enough that it closes that up. And a lot of times that destroys the blood vessel, or it damages the blood vessel. So if you do this too many times, then the cartilage will die, as attractive as that is. So once the cartilage dies, then it slowly sloughs out of your nose, goes away. I mean, it's bone, it's pre-bone is what it is. So what'll happen is they'll lose bone mass in their nose, and it changes the shape of their nose.
Come on.
Which is, they all of a sudden they get a pug nose. Their cartilage is going away, and the end of their nose is still there, but the cartilage is gone, so there's nothing holding this portion, and slowly their nose just kind of bends up like this. Linda Ronstadt had to have her nose reconstructed twice because of all the cocaine she was snorting. The problem with her was that when she snorted cocaine, sometimes she had to have it cauterized. Once you start cauterizing somebody's nose, that blood vessels, eventually you're going to destroy the blood vessel. You damage it every time you do it, but yeah, and that's what happened. And she had to have her, and that's why she's got Parkinson's disease today. Whoops. So these rock stars, all of Francis's buddies, a lot of these individuals are, they're killing themselves in their 60s and 70s because of the shit that they did when they were in their 20s and 30s. That's the way it works.
I remember my dad telling me he tried cocaine, and I was just like, that's crazy. I don't even know if he still does it or...
Once upon a time, we thought that cocaine wasn't addictive. Yeah, but now we know that that's not true at all.
I know my dad talks about like monsters and like in his dreams they become vivid and he relives it.
That's cocaine.
But he usually turns to alcohol. So,
DTs, sure.
Yeah. My uncle calls it beer monsters.
You see them in ads all the time for alcoholics. They don't want that monster to come back, so they keep drinking. Either with the initial stimulatory stage that causes seizures, hypertension, stroke, or tachycardia. So normally when they die from one of these causes: seizures, hypertension, hyperthermia, or a stroke. Hyperthermia is where your temperature spikes, and if it goes above a certain level, then it starts destroying brain nerves in the brain. This is one of the reasons why if your child has a fever, you need to bring it down, and you can do it with ibuprofen. Usually is what people are using now, or child dosage Tylenol. Probably should stay away from aspirin because it will cause Reye syndrome.
I think I just go the natural way first, like just different things first, and
Sure.
then if it doesn't work, then
Hit her with some juice.
some ibuprofen.
Ibuprofen.
Then if that doesn't work, sometimes it's like a nasty virus, or
Right.
then I'll just give her Tylenol, but I'll space it between 2 hours apart.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That'll work. In the old days, before people got measles shots, if they got the measles, then they would have a fever that wouldn't come down. That you couldn't control. Tachycardia means that their heart is beating very rapidly, and of course that will kill them. Later with depression stage, they may die from respiratory depression and coma. Remember, they're overstimulating their bodies. They're overstimulating themselves, and they will have all kinds of interesting reactions. One of the reasons why we can't go, well, this is what always happens to everybody, is because everybody's different. Body mass may be different. Male, female are different. Muscle mass, of course. Menstruation. If a female's in menstruation, she's going to have a different reaction. If the weather's like this, you're going to have a different reaction than you would if it were a sunny day. So there's a lot of different factors that feed into this. We used to get a lot of overdoses on rainy days, and it was always like at 2 o'clock in the morning when the storm was moving through. All these guys had come in with all kinds of interesting problems, heroin overdoses and cocaine. Well, usually it was methamphetamine overdoses, but they would come in at whenever it was a storm. That's one of the reasons why women give birth when it's really bad weather, is because the barometric pressure has gone down and it changes everything. So she goes into labor. Sometimes it's false labor, but we almost always, anytime we had a storm moving through, we knew that the delivery room was going to be full, the emergency room was going to be full.
Does it go with the moon as well, when it's full moon?
Yeah, well, kinda. The full moon, we used to have lots of problems. I don't know if it has to do with people thinking that the moon makes them crazy, makes them loony. But the emergency room was always full. Not so many births, but a lot of crazy stuff going on in the emergency room. A lot of overdoses.
Is there research with that, with the moon?
There is, and I don't know if that's how true all that stuff is. Does it have something to do with the moon? Well, yeah, it changes the tides, so potentially that could change the barometric pressure as well. Some people will experience inverse tolerance, where they become more sensitive to the cocaine's effects, and of course they are more likely to overdose. Long-term cocaine, this isn't the worst. I got a worse picture coming up. So, yeah, this is long-term cocaine or amphetamine usage can lead to tactile hallucinations called formications. The sensation that tiny bugs are crawling on their user's skin, and the reason is because your hair follicles are bouncing up and down, and it's caused by the cocaine or the crystal meth. And this is the reason why they shave all their hair off, including the hair on their head, and including the hair in their pubic region, but especially their arms and legs, because that's where it feels like the bugs are. They think they've got crabs because of their hair follicles vibrating or doing whatever they're doing. Anyway, it feels like they've got bugs crawling all over them. And they'll pick at it. It itches, and they'll scratch until they bleed. And then they'll keep picking at the scabs, especially if they've got hair. But if they shave their hair, the reaction isn't as extreme. The user will scratch themselves bloody, and then because they think they have imaginary pests. But this isn't the only problem that people that snort cocaine and use crystal meth have. The other problem is their teeth. Cocaine and amphetamine usage may also cause dental problems for the user. This is usually caused from poor nutrition. They're just not eating properly, or they're not eating at all. They also don't brush their teeth because they got lots more important things to think about than their teeth. And of course, the drugs are acidic, and it creates an acidic environment in their bodies. If they don't keep hydrated, which is a really serious problem with these individuals, it'll cause their gums to recede, and of course then they have all kinds of interesting dental problems. This is especially a serious problem for individuals that have bad teeth anyway. People who are of English descent. The Brits have the worst teeth in the world for some ungodly reason. The Brits and the Scots. It's like 50%, by the time you're 30 years old, 50% of people in Scotland have false teeth, have all their teeth pulled and have false teeth. It's insane. Their dental hygiene is just god awful. Well, it's worse than that because they eat a lot of sugar. That's their biggest problem, is the fact that they eat a lot of sugar. Now, they don't get type 2 diabetes, or it doesn't seem to be all that prevalent, but they just really ruin their
Would it
teeth.
be from the tea, the caffeine from the tea?
Probably not. It's just that genetically they don't have very good teeth. We had a neighbor when I was growing up who didn't have any, the covering on her teeth was gone. So she had teeth, certainly, but she didn't have any of that hard covering on her teeth. So she had to have all of her teeth pulled in.
Tar or enamel?
No, what am I, enamel. She didn't have any enamel on her teeth. Her teeth looked okay, I guess. They were kind of yellow, kind of green, but yeah, eventually she had to have them all pulled anyway. But she was English, she was of English descent.
You should use Sensodyne. It rebuilds enamel.
I don't know that it's going to do any good for somebody with this kind of problem. Seizures are sometimes caused by excessive cocaine or amphetamine usage. 2 to 10% of cocaine users will have seizures. 3 times more women will have them than men because of the body mass and muscle mass and fat portions of their body. Anyway, so about, there's a number of people will just have seizures when they use cocaine. The question you have to ask yourself, does that stop them from using cocaine again? And the answer, of course, is nope. Cocaine and amphetamine users can sometimes suffer from gastrointestinal problems. There's a reason why it affects your digestive system. The reason has to do with when you use, of course, it all has to do with what's going on in your brain. It causes spasms in your digestive system. So these individuals can have, explosive diarrhea, but they can also have all kinds of interesting problems, perpetual problems. I mean, they can use cocaine and they'll have to, they'll have explosive diarrhea almost immediately. But it irritates your bowels, as strange as that may seem.
It goes.
Doesn't, not with everybody. No, it has to do with what's going on here, and your brain tells your digestive system that there's something going on. So they'll have a spasm.
Okay.
And yeah,
Okay.
you don't want to even think about what I'm thinking about. You don't want to, it's nasty. Yeah, a lot of times these individuals, well, I won't tell you. Okay. They'll have an episode while they're laying on the gurney, and they won't be able to control it because it's explosive diarrhea. Anyway, not important. Sometimes they'll develop gastric ulcers, retroperitoneal fibrosis, where they develop fibroid masses in between their stomach and their intestines. Visceral infarctions. This is your viscera is the covering of your intestines. Infarction means death. So they'll have chunks of their stomachs will die. Not stomachs, but their intestines will die. Intestinal ischemia. Ischemia has to do with blood strokes. It's blood clots. Gastrointestinal tract perforation, where holes will actually develop, and then of course they become sick. Colonic ischemia, of course, has to do with your colon. So it's all through your intestinal tract, as much fun as that is. Now this doesn't happen to everybody, certainly not everybody has diarrhea, but if they have explosive diarrhea, then probably they've got a gastrointestinal reaction to their cocaine. And these are the individuals that need to stop, because they're going to destroy their guts if they're not careful. Some people are hypersensitive to things. Some people have hypersensitive livers. Some people have hypersensitive digestive tracts. Some people have hypersensitive hearts. Some people have hypersensitive respiratory systems, like asthma is that type of a situation. Not everybody has asthma. Not everybody has heart problems. Not everybody has digestive problems. But select individuals do. Well, these are the individuals that need to stay away from cocaine, because it's like a shock to your system. And whatever is the weakest, it'll attack that area. So if your digestive tract is your problem, then you're going to have digestive problems if you use cocaine. If your heart's your problem, it may kill you the first time you use it. Whoops. If your lungs are the problem, you may develop drug-induced asthma or bronchitis. So you got to be careful. Well, they should be careful. Another possible side effect of cocaine usage comes from dopamine changes in the cerebellum from cocaine or amphetamine toxicity. The individual suffers from involuntary writhing, flailing, jerking, or sinuous movements of the arms and legs. Now this is really kind of interesting because this happens to just about everybody after prolonged usage. They get what we refer to as crack dancing. These individuals are crack dancers. I have a film of somebody crack dancing, and it's kind of interesting.
I have a copy of
Now this individual is African American, but it doesn't mean that it only happens to African Americans. It happens to just about everybody. If you know anybody from Pinyon, where they seem to have had a really serious problem with crystal meth, somebody that's been using for a number of years, then potentially they've got this problem. They can't sit still. It's really kind of fascinating. It's fascinating to me because I don't do this stuff.
Remember how you were talking about on Tuesday about how cocaine used to be in everything?
I'm sorry?
How cocaine used to be in everything back in the
Oh yeah, they used to put it in
So
stuff.
did they have a lot of these symptoms? No?
They didn't use that much of it, and it wasn't processed like it is today. It's kind of like marijuana. Marijuana back in the 60s, there wasn't much to it. There wasn't very much THC in it, but now there's just tons of it.
Utilities, and also for the cost of a DNA paternity test that the two of them engaged in. Apparently the two of them have taken the test and directed that it be furnished to me for my inspection with whomever. Well, in other words, if he's not the father, then she pays. If he is the father, she gets paid. That's good. That's good. That ain't bad. Well, yes, I'm not going to try to report. Well, just chill. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Your Honor. Judge Joe Brown. You know how to act better. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I ain't trying to show out. Would you stop? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, I'll try to. Can you hold still, or are you under the influence? Under the influence. Not right now. But that woman down, she done drove me down, influence a lot of things that I said I never do.
He gonna lie.
Oh, how can I? When it's the truth. God knows.
Oh.
I wouldn't bring him into
Are you please?
How would you take care of him if officially you're unemployed? What's
Thank
your
you.
I wasn't unemployed then.
You were
I wasn't unemployed then.
Yes, you
But I
were.
was selling.
No, excuse me, Your Honor.
Oh my God.
He was doing that. But he was receiving his daughter's Social Security check for her mother's death. And he wasn't giving me none like that.
Everybody, excuse me. Were you? Let him go. Let him tell the truth. Let him tell the truth. Okay, just let him go. I have a purpose. You're showing a classic example. All that kinetic. I'm sorry, too much energy. This just, I'm sorry, but it's just all still showing the residual effects from. So you already said that you were moving merchandise. I'm not lying. I'm not denying. I'm here to tell the truth. Didn't I say? Didn't I raise my right hand? I don't care who is the truth. The only one can condemn me is God. But Your Honor, you may get a little remark. He worketh in mysterious ways. Don't he? Don't he? Yes. He does. He works through you right now. Whatever you decide. You've candidly admitted that you've been moving merchandise. Oh, Arkansas knows it.
Arkansas knows it. The man cannot stand still. You notice he's moving his head all over the place. He cannot not move. He's bouncing back and forth. The only way he can stabilize himself is to grab a hold of that podium. And when he does that, he almost can stand still, but all of a sudden his head starts moving. This is crack. That's what crack dancing looks like. This is perpetual. He's never going to recover from this. He will always do this until
Even when he's off.
Yeah. Well, he's off now. He's not stoned right now. Yeah, he admits that he was a pusher and that he was selling the stuff, but he was also using the stuff, and he used enough of this stuff that he got all this kinetic movement that he can't control, and that's unfortunate. Anyway, there you go. That's what crack dancing looks like.
Can people get mixed up with people with mental disorders?
Well, you don't usually see people moving like this. There is a catatonic situation where the individual can't stop doing things. So tics, they'll get a tic, where they can't control it. This he's stuck. He's gone. He's going to be that way the rest of his life. Whoops.
Used to have an individual like that in Chinle, a couple years back, in the town, and his head was just rolled. It was normal, but I think it's just what condition, I don't know how it's conditioned that way, maybe drugs or, but when you talk to him, he'd be talking to him, he's moving, and he'd walk all the way back across town, back to, I think he lived in Del Muerto. Unfortunately, somebody, he got jumped. But he did get jumped because he never did slice his neck in here.
Oh no! Trey slit his throat.
Did they find who the killer was?
He was like vulnerable to almost about anything, so I guess they took advantage of that.
Oh, sure. Schizophrenia is caused from too much dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway. It is normally caused by a hereditary imbalance or a disease state that affects this area. So it can be just about anything that can cause the schizophrenia. The flu can cause schizophrenia. Since cocaine and amphetamines increase dopamine in this area, it can trigger stimulant-induced paranoid schizophrenia. The main effects are auditory, visual, or tactile hallucinations and paranoid delusions, which is not
The
good.
flu can cause.
Yeah, the flu can kick you into schizophrenia. But so can smoking pot can kick you into schizophrenia, which is one of the real fears of people. They're afraid that, it's traumatic to the brain. Anything traumatic to the brain can cause a schizoid episode, or can kick you into schizophrenia, can kick you into psychosis. So the flu, blow to the head, this kind of stuff, or marijuana can actually trigger it. And for that reason, they're afraid that if they legalize marijuana, that we're going to have a vast increase of people that suffer from schizophrenia. Now, normally you can stay away from this. All you have to do is not have anybody hit you in the head, or I haven't had the flu in forever, so you never get the flu. But with marijuana, if everybody smokes marijuana, it's going to trigger a lot more schizophrenia in the future. Stimulant-induced psychosis is impossible to differentiate from organic psychosis. It's the same way with Parkinson's disease. We can't tell the difference between drug-induced Parkinson's disease and normal Parkinson's disease. So if you look at people that have it, you have to look at their background to figure out whether something triggered it, like cocaine or amphetamines, or whether they would have developed Parkinson's disease anyway. Michael J. Fox is a perfect example. He was a big beer drinker when he came down. Canadians drink a lot. They drink more than Americans do, I guess I can say that. But he was a big beer drinker when he came to Hollywood. And then, of course, he kind of drifted into, he was a very successful actor, so he started snorting cocaine. And next thing you know, he's got Parkinson's disease. In his 30s. I mean, you don't develop Parkinson's disease in your 30s. If it's hereditary, and you're going to develop it anyway, you'll probably develop it in your 50s or 60s. You'll have some select symptoms like the tremors, but you're not going to develop it in your 30s, and that's what he did. He developed it in his 30s. It was triggered by the cocaine, and the same way with Linda Ronstadt. She has it now. She's in her 60s. She developed it like 5 years ago, but she snorted a lot of cocaine. So that's the way it works. Psychotic symptoms may disappear with abstinence, but it may take hours, days, or even months. 1/3 to 1/2 of chronic cocaine users will develop mild transient paranoia. So this is a really serious problem. People that are paranoid are relatively dangerous, especially if they are violent, have a violent personality otherwise. They will do things like accumulate weapons and ammunition just in case. You heard about the Coast Guard lieutenant who was massing weapons and ammunition in his house. He was going to attack, he's a white race, he was a white supremacist, and he was going to attack all the liberal people in Washington. He was living in Silver Springs, Maryland, which is right beside Washington, D.C. He had a hit list of people that he was going to kill. He was going to kill people at CNN. He was going to kill Rachel Maddow from MSNBC. He was going to kill Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. He was going to kill Elijah Cummings, the head of the Ways and Means Committee. So he couldn't kill anybody that's liberal. He had a list, had a whole list of them. And he had the weapons. He had 17 weapons. 5 of them were scoped rifles. So, with repeated use after a psychotic episode, smaller and smaller doses will trigger psychotic episodes. And this is a problem. I told you about the young lady that I used to teach up in Montana. She had a psychotic episode where she thought she was Hispanic. Well, it turned out she's not Hispanic at all. She's Inuit and Grolon. Yeah, she's Eskimo and she's Grolon. But she would have these psychotic episodes where she thought she was Hispanic. She started speaking Spanish. I told you that one time she went to the cops and she told them that her father had murdered her mother. And buried her body in the backyard. And she even took him to the house. And it was an abandoned house. Yeah, there wasn't anybody living there. They dug up the backyard and didn't find it. Well, it turned out, she's speaking Spanish. And of course, nobody in Montana speaks Spanish. There's hardly anybody. I mean, Mexicans don't. People that actually speak Spanish don't ever go to Montana. It's way too far north. But so nobody could speak Spanish, and everybody thought she was speaking Spanish to them. Turned out she was just speaking gibberish, but it sounded like Spanish to them. And she said, my name is Rosita Conchita, Alvarez or whatever. She had just used crystal meth like 2 days before, and she was still stoned. But once she came off of it, she's sitting there in the police department. She couldn't figure out where she was or what was going on. And she started speaking to them, and she had lost her Spanish accent. And, she didn't know who she was, or she did. She knew that she was Inuit. Anyway. Turned out that the reason that she'd come into town was because her father had died, and she had gone to the funeral. Well, anytime she went into Great Falls, she had this desire to use crystal meth. So she used it this time. She didn't miss the funeral. Her mother was still alive. It was her father that was dead. But somehow in her psychotic state, she came up with this whole thing about her father murdering her mother, and her mother was still alive. Her father was dead. Her mother was still alive. Anyway, so I told her, you can't use this stuff again. If you ever do, you're gonna have another psychotic episode. And she was fine, and then her mother got sick and she had to go to Great Falls. She used again. She had another psychotic episode. This time they put her in the mental hospital. This time the police knew who she was. My God, she was. Of course, she's just going crazy. They're trying to tell her, they're trying to lock her up and tell her that she's not this person. And she's screaming and she's fighting them and she's scratching everybody. We lost her for about a month. Eventually they released her. But I told her she couldn't do that anymore. It's triggering psychotic episodes. And the sad thing was, of course, she had 2 boys at home. Somebody else is taking care of them. Polydrug use is very common among cocaine users because the individual may need chemical assistance to come down off their stimulation. The most common drug use used with drugs, cocaine, are alcohol. Remember, when you use alcohol and cocaine, it forms cocaethylene in your stomach, or in your stomach, and it's 3 times stronger than the cocaine. So if you drink while you're using cocaine, it'll last for 30 minutes instead of 10 minutes. You can use cocaine and heroin, that's known as speedballing. You're getting a double reaction at the same time. This doesn't add itself together, it multiplies the reaction. People die from speedballing because they usually have a heart attack. Heroin slows everything down, cocaine speeds everything up. When you take the 2 together, it speeds up your heart, and that's usually they die of a heart attack. John Belushi, Chris Farley, they both died of speedballing. Sedative hypnotics, of course, they get an opposite effect. You can smoke while you're using your cocaine. A person who smokes cigarettes is 22 times more likely to use cocaine than a non-smoker. So nicotine acts as a gateway drug for cocaine. While the purity of cocaine coming into the country averages 80 to 90%, most marketed cocaine has been cut with substances to increase profits. They use baby laxatives. Remember that explosive diarrhea I was telling you about? Lactose, vitamin B, they cut it with vitamin B. They cut it with aspirin. This is really dangerous if they cut it with aspirin, because if they cut it with aspirin, you can get it'll kick you into a coma. And the reason it does this is because it causes a situation known as Reye's syndrome. Reye's syndrome is usually caused when somebody has a high fever and they take aspirin to bring it down, and it will put them into a coma. Well, the aspirin, of course, they already have hypothermia because of the cocaine, so a lot of times it will kick them into Reye's syndrome. And then they come into the emergency room, and you figure, and you ask them, well, what's going on? You know, what happened? And they'll say, well, somebody will say they took aspirin, and you think it's Reye's syndrome because they have the measles or something, and it turns out to be cocaine. We save their lives anyway. It's not like we shove them over into the corner and not treat them. Mannitol, sugar, tetracaine, or procaine are other things.
Do you usually refer them to a mental health specialist? Or do they go to jail after the...
Usually, well, it all depends. It all depends. If we arrested everybody that came into the emergency room on drugs, the drugs would be full of drug addicts. So, I mean, we don't usually do that. The police don't want them. And it's really not the police that make the final decision. It's always the lawyers, the defense, not the defense department. What am I thinking of? Anyway, it's the county attorneys have to decide what they want to do with them. Usually they don't prosecute this stuff. They just let it go, or they send them to rehab, or it all depends on how frequently they're coming in.
But right after, you just let them go? After they're treated?
Well, it all depends on how the doctor's feeling that night. And usually we don't do a drug screen on them, so we can't prove that that's what their problem is. If you accuse somebody of using drugs when they're not using drugs, they can sue you for libel. Yeah, this is real. I mean, it's like if a kid comes in who's all beat up and you think it's the parents that are doing it, yeah, okay. So you don't want them to do it again, but you don't know that it was them. Could have been his brother. It could have been, he could have fallen off, really run into the door, or fallen off the monkey bars or something. You can't, if you accuse somebody of something they didn't do, then you can get into a lot of trouble. So usually emergency room personnel, unless they know for sure, definitely for sure. The problem is it's really hard to treat them if you don't know what all their problems are, what they're using. You'll give them a drug and potentially it will interact with that drug. So these guys, usually we don't give them a lot of stuff because we're afraid of drug interaction, synergistic effects and whatnot. We can make them worse. So, and they never tell you the truth. Somebody comes in that's drunk, they only had a couple beers, you never have any clue how much they drank. So you don't know what to do with them. That's the biggest problem with people that use alcohol and take drugs. You never know, and you can't, and they won't tell you the truth, and sometimes they don't know. I mean, a lot of times when you're drunk, you're not counting beers or shots or whatever. If you watch the movies, these people looks like, they got all these shot glasses stacked up. It looks like they're taking 15 or 20 shots. That'll kill you, I mean, but they never know. Injecting any drug is dangerous, but injecting street drugs is especially dangerous. The user can never be sure of the purity of the drug. The drug may be contaminated with dangerous substances that are not meant to be introduced into the human body. Bacteria and viruses may be introduced. 50 to 90% of IV drug users are infected with hepatitis C from using contaminated needles. Once upon a time, we couldn't treat hepatitis C. You died with hepatitis C. But within the last year and a half, they've come out with a new treatment for hepatitis C, and they can cure it in about 5 weeks now with this concentrated treatment. You'll see it on television from time to time. It's really kind of exciting, and it's good news for all those people that were goofy when they were kids, and now that they're in their 40s and 50s, they've got hepatitis, they've got liver problems. Well, now we can cure that. We can cure the hepatitis C. I'm not exactly sure what the substance is. I need to look into that. Manufacturers and refiners of cocaine had known that the paste or freebase state, cocaine could be smoked without destroying the euphoric properties. The problem, of course, the fastest way to get something into your system is to smoke it. But you couldn't do that with cocaine because if you put it in a cigarette, it cooked it and it destroyed it. But if you use the paste, then you can actually smoke it, and it will still give you a euphoric effect. When freebase is mixed with marijuana and smoked, it is referred to as bazooka, basuco, or pasta. This form of ingestion gives the user a more intense and immediate effect than snorting. So if you use the cocaine paste, you can actually smoke it. This is all good news. We were worried that these people couldn't get it into their system fast enough.
there's a movie called Blow.
Blow?
With Johnny Depp, and the beginning of the movie, it shows how it's like where they make the cocaine up in the mountains.
Oh, sure.
How it's like how we discussed it with they mixed it up, they trampled it, and it's all liquefied and down to where it's just like paste. Just the beginning of that first 5 minutes of the movie. So it shows all the way to when you stamp it, put it on the plane, it's shipped. So it's interesting.
Fascinating. Johnny Depp, huh? Oh, one of my favorites.
I know in high school, or in not high school, but like middle school, little kids like around my age, they're so stupid. They would like crush up hot Cheetos, and they would make a line, and they would snort it.
Oh, God.
Or they'll use Kool-Aid. They'll like make a line of Kool-Aid, and then they'll snort it. And I'm just like,
Why?
yeah. Probably because like they saw a movie, like that movie,
Yeah.
and they thought it was cool. But with hot Cheetos, like that burns and.
Smart. Jeez, I wish I was a kid again. Cracker Freebase has 4 properties to make it sought commodity. The melting point is higher, 195 degrees, compared to the powder. The powder dissolves at 98 degrees, which is 98.6. Okay, it wouldn't work on me. I couldn't snort cocaine. It wouldn't work. My body temperature is in the 96 range, so it wouldn't activate. I know. As long as your temperature is 98.6 or 99, then you're fine. You can snort all the cocaine in the world and it'll get into your system. But somebody like me, my temperature is sometimes down below 96 degrees, which is maybe one of the reasons why I never get sick. I'm too cold. Cold son of a bitch, that's what's in it. It reaches the brain faster when it's smoked, of course. This form is more readily absorbed by the fat cells in the brain, giving it a more intense reaction. Higher doses of cocaine can be ingested in a shorter period of time. Who do we know that freebased? Ricky Nelson died from freebasing. Somebody was freebasing on that airplane because, okay, here's the deal. They were freebasing with ether. Ether is kind of an interesting substance. It's a heavy liquid. So it's a heavy gas. And so if I had ether and I poured it on this table, it would run off the table and run onto the floor is what it would do. It's a gas. Now most gases just stay where they are. You know, oxygen or whatever, it just stays where it is. But ether is heavy, so it'll go down to the ground. It'll go to the lowest point. So they were using ether, which is highly explosive, as to freebase. And you can do it in a Coke can. You can do it in a lot of different things. You put the ether in there, you cook it, and then it turns because you put the paste in there, and it turns the cocaine or the cocaine paste into vapor. But you have to heat it up to 195 degrees. So you need the ether as an accelerant. Okay. However, there's a problem. There can be a problem. Remember, it always goes to its lowest point. So what happened with Richard Pryor? He tilted the can, and it went down into his throat. Now this is burning ether, and it burned his throat all the way down until it stopped. He burned his esophagus. He was in the hospital for an extended length of time. He burned all the skin off his face because it splashed. It's like liquid gas is what it is, the ether, and that's what happened with him. What happened with Ricky Nelson when they were taking off in the plane? Somebody dropped their freebasing can, and of course it's a heavy liquid, so and it's burning, and when it hit the ground, it spilled out and it went throughout the airplane. It just went to the back of the plane because they were taking off, and so it caught everything on fire, and then the plane blew up and killed everybody on the plane.
Ricky Nelson.
Anyway, freebasing. Not safe and stupid. It is so dumb to do this
Oh my
stuff.
God.
I know. We
On the
need-
plane.
on an airplane. Let's all freebase on the airplane. Richard Pryor went running out of the house. Of course, his face is on fire. His lungs are on fire. And he almost killed himself. He almost died. But he came back. And of course, he's dead now. But he's probably dead from doing it.
He actually